Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready. What have we got today?
Well, we're heading back to 1989, Long Island,
Hmm?
and a case that really, I think, shook a community to its core.
Long Island, huh? I'm already getting a bad feeling about this one.
Yeah, this one's, it's a tough one. It's the murder of Kellyanne Tynes.
I've heard of this case. Wasn't this one of the first cases where DNA evidence played a big role?
Yeah, you're right. It was a real turning point in forensic science. But before we get into all that, let's paint a picture for our listeners, set the scene.
Okay, yeah, context is everything, right?
Absolutely. So we're in Valley Stream, Long Island, early March 1989. Picture a typical suburban neighborhood, the kind of where kids are out playing, riding their bikes, everyone knows each other.
Kind of a like a Leave It to Beaver kind of vibe.
Exactly. Peaceful, safe. The biggest worry is whether the local ice cream shop is going to run out of sprinkles.
Ah, the good old days,
Mm.
right?
Well, that's what it seemed like. But, as we'll see, that sense of security was about to be shattered.
So in this idyllic setting, who is Kellyanne Tynes?
So Kelly's 13 years old, just a couple of days shy of her 14th birthday. By all accounts, a bright, responsible kid, loved by her family, friends.
Just a normal teenager?
Yeah, pretty much. Involved in school activities, close to her family, the kind of kid her parents trust to babysit her little brother.
And she was babysitting, right, the day she disappeared.
That's right. It was a Friday, March 3rd. Kelly was home from school watching her 8-year-old brother, Richie. And at some point during the afternoon, she gets a phone call.
Okay, so a phone call. Is this where things start to get suspicious?
Well, the caller said his name was John, and Kelly, she told Richie that she was going to a friend's house and left.
Did she say which friend?
No. And that's part of what's strange about this whole thing. You see, Richie, he realizes after a while that Kelly's been gone a lot longer than she normally would be if she was just visiting a friend nearby.
So he starts to get worried.
Right. He starts looking for her in the neighborhood. And get this, multiple neighbors tell him they saw Kelly go into the Gallup family's house down the street.
The Gallup family, who are they?
Well, from what I've gathered, the Gallups were, well, kind of known for keeping to themselves, not really involved in the community like other families on the block.
Kind of like outsiders.
Yeah, there was something, I don't know, something a little off about them, according to folks in the neighborhood.
Okay, so Kelly's missing. She was last seen going into this house of these kind of strange people. What happens next?
Well, as you can imagine, as hours pass, Kelly's parents start to panic. They're calling everyone they can think of, going door to door, desperately searching for her.
But no one seems to know where she is.
Exactly. Except for those neighbors who saw her enter that Gallup house.
So the focus is now on this house.
Right. The police get called in, and after talking to the Gallup family, they get permission to search the house.
I'm guessing this is where things take a really dark turn.
Yeah, you could say that. It's in the basement of that house, in that family's basement, that investigators make a horrific discovery. A discovery that would send shockwaves through Valley Stream and beyond.
I think I know where this is going.
In the midst of all that clutter, a green sleeping bag, partially unzipped,
Oh, God.
and inside, the body of Kellyanne Tynes.
I knew it. It's hard to even imagine, finding something like that in a family's basement.
I know, and for the community, I mean, this was just devastating. That sense of safety, of innocence, it was just gone.
Just shattered.
You mentioned the basement was cluttered. Did that make the investigation harder?
Oh, absolutely. The crime scene, it was horrific. I mean, the medical examiner later testified that Kelly had suffered over 200 blows to the head. Her throat had been slashed almost to the backbone, bite marks, stab wounds. It was brutal.
That's just unimaginable. Given the severity of the attack, investigators must have been looking for someone with a lot of physical strength.
Yeah, they were. And that's one of the reasons why suspicion quickly fell on one of the Gallagher brothers, Robert. He was a bodybuilder, 21 years old.
There were other people in the house that day, though, right?
There were Robert's younger brother, John, the one who had called Kelly, and two of his friends. But the friends, they were ruled out pretty quickly. Passed polygraph tests, their stories checked out.
So the focus shifts to Robert. What kind of evidence did they have against him?
Well, apart from his size and strength, investigators found Robert's handprint near Kelly's body, and there were bloodstains on briefcases that had some of Kelly's clothes in them. And those bloodstains, they matched Robert's blood type.
Okay, so that's pretty incriminating. But
Huh?
you said earlier that this case was significant because of DNA evidence. Was DNA testing used against Robert?
It was, and this is where things get pretty interesting, I think, from a historical and scientific perspective. Back in 1989, DNA testing, it was brand new, and it wasn't really widely accepted in the courts yet.
So using it in this case, it was kind of a gamble for the prosecution.
Yeah, you could say that. A calculated risk for sure. They knew the defense would try to, discredit the DNA
Did
evidence.
they have any other strong evidence besides the DNA?
They had the handprint, the bloodstains, and Robert, he failed a polygraph test, which he'd actually tried to manipulate the results.
So it sounds like they might have had a solid case,
Yeah.
even without the DNA.
It's hard to say. This was a time when, juries they were really skeptical of scientific evidence, especially something as new and complicated as DNA testing.
So the prosecution, they had to prove Robert was guilty, but they also had to convince the jury that this DNA technology, it was reliable.
Exactly. So this trial, it became about more than just Kelly's murder. It was a landmark case for forensic science.
I bet the atmosphere in the community leading up to the trial was really tense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, think about it. A young girl brutally murdered, and the accused is someone who lives right there in the neighborhood. The Gallup family, they were harassed. Their house, people started calling it the murder house.
And for Kelly's family, waiting for justice, it must have been just agonizing.
Absolutely. The trial didn't even start until February of 1990, so almost a year after Kelly's murder. That year must have felt like an eternity for them.
Can you tell us about the trial? What was the prosecution's strategy?
Well, they were very methodical. They focused on the physical evidence, the witness statements, and of course the DNA evidence linking Robert to the crime. They presented him as this rage-filled killer who'd lured Kelly to the house and then just snapped.
And the defense, what was their approach?
Their main goal was to create doubt about the DNA evidence, saying it was too new, too unreliable to be used in court. And they also tried to shift the blame.
Shift the blame. To who?
Well, they suggested that maybe one of the younger boys was responsible.
But those boys, they had alibis, right?
Yeah, they did. It was a long shot, for sure. They even tried to claim there was a police conspiracy against Robert, which, given the evidence, was a pretty hard sell.
So what happened? What was the reaction when the verdict was read?
Well, the medical examiner's testimony was really hard to hear. He described Kelly's injuries in graphic detail. I mean, even seasoned detectives were shaken by it.
Wow. And after hearing all that, the jury deliberated for a day before coming back with a verdict.
And that verdict was guilty, second-degree murder. The courtroom, it was a mix of emotions, relief, I think, for Kelly's family, and just, despair for the Gallup family.
I can only imagine. What about the sentencing?
The judge, he didn't hold back. He called Robert's actions the most atrocious he had ever encountered in his 17 years on the bench. Robert was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, and he maintained his innocence. He blamed a police conspiracy, said the evidence was planted.
So even after being convicted, he still denied everything. Did that ever change?
It did, actually. Years later, in 2013, during a parole hearing, Robert, he confessed to the murder.
He confessed. After all those years.
He did. He claimed it was a steroid-fueled rage. Said he never meant to kill Kelly, but the steroids, they made him lose control.
Wow. That's a pretty big turn of events. Do you think his confession was real? Or was he just, trying to get parole?
It's hard to say, really. Was it genuine remorse or just, a calculated move? The parole board, they weren't convinced. They denied his request. And Robert, he's still in prison today.
It's a confession that I think just raises more questions than it answers. I have a hard time believing that steroids alone could lead to such a brutal attack.
Yeah, it's complicated. Steroids, they can increase aggression, sure, but they don't usually turn people into killers. And the fact that Robert, he lied for so many years, it makes you wonder about how sincere his confession really was.
This case, it had such a huge impact on Valley Stream. How did the community, cope with such a horrific event?
Well, Kelly's murder, it left a scar on the community. There's this sense of collective trauma, I think, a loss of innocence that people still feel. But even with all that, the community, they showed a lot of resilience.
What do you mean by resilience?
Well, every year on Kelly's birthday, her family and friends, They hold a celebration in her honor. They release balloons, they share stories, they remember the joy that she brought into their lives.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's their way of keeping her memory alive and making sure that she's not defined by the way she died.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there can be light and hope.
Yeah.
It really is.
Mhm.
And it speaks to, the strength of the human spirit. It's a reminder that even though these horrible things happen, we can still, find ways to heal, to remember, to honor those we've lost.
Absolutely. And this case, it's more than just a tragedy. It's a reminder of the importance of community, of supporting victims and their families, and of fighting for justice for those who can't fight for themselves anymore.
It also really highlights, I think, the evolution of forensic science, the role that DNA evidence plays in our justice system now. I mean, imagine if this crime had happened, just a few years earlier, before DNA testing was around.
It's scary to think about, right? Robert Gallup, he might have gotten away with things.
Exactly. It was a turning point, not just for Kelly's family, not just for Valley Stream, but for the way we investigate these kinds of violent crimes, period.
Yeah, it had a ripple effect. It really did. And this case, it brings up some really important questions, I think, about violence. What causes it? How
Right.
can we as a society prevent it?
It's a reminder that evil, it can exist anywhere, even in these, seemingly perfect places. It's a call to be vigilant, to protect our kids,
Mm.
and to never forget the victims.
And to understand, I think, that there's not always a simple answer. There's so many factors that can contribute to violence, and we need to approach these issues with empathy, with a willingness to find solutions.
This deep dive, it's been really insightful, but it's also been, pretty emotionally heavy. What stays with you from this case? What questions are you still thinking about?
For me, it's the lasting impact on everyone involved. Kelly's family, her friends, the community, they all carry this weight. And while time can help, I think the scars of a loss like that, they never really go away entirely.
It's a reminder that behind every headline, behind every trial, there are real people whose lives have been changed forever.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of just unimaginable darkness, there can be hope, there can be healing, and there can be this determination to find meaning and purpose in the aftermath of tragedy, like Kelly's family with their commitment to celebrating her life. That's powerful.
It really is. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit. This case, it's been a journey, that's for sure. A journey through some pretty dark territory, but it's also shown us the importance of resilience, of community, and of never giving up the fight for justice. So thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the haunting case of Kelly and Tiny's. We'll see you next time.